The sun, a weary eye in the vast canvas of the sky, began its slow descent, bleeding hues of ochre and rose across the high desert. It was a light that knew no haste, a light that had witnessed millennia unfurl in the patient embrace of this land. In the heart of what was once a vibrant, living pueblo, now a whisper of adobe and stone, the Zuni waffle gardens lay dormant, their intricate patterns etched into the parched earth like forgotten prayers. These were not gardens of lush abundance, not in the conventional sense. They were sculptures of necessity, born from the relentless yet gentle spirit of a people attuned to the subtle language of the desert. Here, time flowed not in ticks of a clock, but in the slow erosion of stone, the whisper of wind through sagebrush, the gradual unfurling of a cactus bloom. The sleepless historian, a being woven from the dust and echoes of ages, observed with a quiet intensity. There was no urgency in this place, only an enduring rhythm, a deep, abiding peace that settled like the fine grit of sand on sun-baked skin. The historian's voice, a low hum like the distant thrum of the earth's core, began to weave its narrative, a lullaby of forgotten lives. The waffle gardens, so named for their distinctive crisscrossing trenches, were a testament to a profound understanding of water's elusive nature in this arid realm. Each mound and channel was a deliberate conversation with the sky, a careful arrangement designed to capture the ephemeral gift of rain. They were fields of patience, where seeds were not merely sown, but coaxed from slumber, and where life bloomed not in a riot of color, but in a quiet, tenacious persistence. The historian's gaze drifted over the remnants of homes, their walls whispering tales of families gathered around hearths long cold. The air itself seemed to hold the scent of wood smoke, of corn roasting, of the very essence of daily existence. There was a beauty in this decay, a profound elegance in the way nature reclaimed what was once meticulously crafted. The shadows lengthened, stretching like ancient arms, caressing the contours of the land, deepening the sense of stillness. The desert floor, a tapestry of muted tones, absorbed the fading light, preparing for the cool embrace of night. It was a prelude, a gentle drawing of a curtain before the true work of the earth began, a work that mirrored the unhurried devotion of those who had shaped it. The historian's narrative continued, a soft murmur against the growing quiet, each word a pebble dropped into a still pool, its ripples spreading outward, carrying the weight of ages. The Zuni waffle gardens were not simply plots of land, they were a meticulously crafted cartography of necessity, a map drawn not with ink and parchment, but with the very soil and the ingrained wisdom of generations. To truly understand them, one had to shed the hurried cadence of modern life, to adopt a pace that resonated with the slow turning of the planet, with the unfurling of a desert flower that might bloom only for a single dawn. The sleepless historian, a silent sentinel of epochs, spoke in hushed tones, each syllable a grain of fine sand, settling with a comforting weight. The waffle pattern, the defining characteristic, was a genius born of desperation and deep respect for the scant rainfall. Imagine, the historian whispered, the land thirsting, the sun a relentless overseer. How, then, to gather every precious drop that might fall from a sky often as stingy as a miser? The answer lay in this intricate network of low, raised beds and shallow trenches, crisscrossing the landscape in a deliberate, almost sacred geometry. These were not random furrows, they were channels of life, designed to intercept and retain water, to guide it gently to the waiting roots. The raised beds, the waffles themselves, were slightly elevated, creating a subtle basin. The trenches, dug at intervals, acted as miniature reservoirs, catching the runoff from the surrounding higher ground and the brief, intense downpours. This system was a marvel of passive irrigation, a testament to an intimate understanding of hydrology, of how water behaved on this particular terrain. It was not about forcing the land to yield, but about collaborating with its inherent tendencies. The historian's voice dipped lower, a sound like the rustling of dry leaves. Observe the slight elevation of the camas, the careful placement of each mound. Each curve, each angle had a purpose, dictated by the subtle slopes of the land, by the prevailing winds, by the very nature of the soil. It was a language spoken in contours, a dialogue between the people and their environment. This was not the work of a single season, but of accumulated knowledge, passed down through countless lives, each generation adding its own subtle refinement. The patterns, though appearing uniform, held individual nuances, dictated by the specific topography of each garden. The historian's gaze swept across the silent landscape, the soft light illuminating the ancient artistry. The soil itself, in this high desert cradle, held a unique narrative. It was not the rich, dark loam of more temperate climes, but a more challenging canvas, a blend of sand, silt, and ancient mineral dust. Yet, to the Zuni gardeners, it was a living entity, deserving of respect and a particular kind of tending. The sleepless historian, a patient observer of the slow dance of creation, continued their hushed chronicle. The turning of the soil in the waffle gardens was a ritual of profound gentleness, a far cry from the aggressive tilling of modern agriculture. Here, the earth was coaxed, not conquered. The primary tools were simple, fashioned from wood and bone, designed for precision rather than brute force. The historian's voice resonated with a quiet reverence. "Imagine," the historian murmured, "the cool touch of the trowel, the soft crumble of earth between calloused fingers. Each movement was deliberate, imbued with a sense of connection. The raised beds were formed by meticulously piling soil, creating contours that would guide the precious water. This was not a rapid process, it was a slow accumulation, a layering of intention. The trenches were dug with care, their edges softened, their depths precisely calculated to hold the fleeting rain without allowing it to simply drain away. The historian's gaze lingered on the subtle undulations of the earth, the evidence of hands that had worked this land with a deep, abiding respect. There was no rush, no anxious anticipation of immediate harvest. The process itself was the reward, a form of meditation in motion. The gardener's movements were fluid, rhythmic, a slow, deliberate unfolding of a relationship with the earth. The historian's voice dropped to a near whisper, as if sharing a secret. The soil, when treated with such care, yielded its own quiet gifts. It was a soil that remembered the touch of ancient hands, that held the stories of its transformation. The gentle turning was not just about preparing for planting, it was about honoring the earth, about ensuring its continued vitality for generations yet to come. The historian paused, the silence stretching, filled only by the faint sigh of the wind. Within the carefully sculpted earthworks of the waffle gardens lay the seed, a tiny vessel of immense potential waiting for its moment. The Zuni approach to planting was not a hurried scattering, but a deliberate act of trust, a whispered promise to the future. The sleepless historian, their voice a breath against the vast stillness, continued their slow unraveling of this ancient practice. The seeds themselves were often heirloom varieties, passed down through generations, their lineages stretching back into the mists of time. These were not seeds bred for uniformity or speed, but for resilience, for their ability to thrive in the challenging conditions of the desert. Corn, beans, squash, the staples of their sustenance, were planted with an almost ritualistic care. The historian's voice carried the weight of ages. "Imagine," the historian intoned, "the small dry kernels held between thumb and forefinger. Each one was a universe waiting to awaken." The planting was done at the opportune moment, dictated not by a calendar, but by the subtle signs of the earth and the sky.
Too early, and the fragile sprout would perish in a late frost. Too late, and the precious growing season would be cut short. The gardeners observed the flight of birds, the patterns of the clouds, the scent of the air, all cues in this silent dialogue with nature. The historian's gaze followed the almost invisible contours of the gardens, tracing the path of water, envisioning the future growth. The seeds were placed not randomly, but with specific intention, often in clusters, utilizing the symbiotic relationships that had been understood for millennia. The three sisters, corn, beans, and squash, were planted together, each supporting the other. The corn provided a trellis for the beans fixed nitrogen in the soil, and the squash, with its broad leaves, suppressed weeds and retained moisture. This was not just agriculture, it was a miniature ecosystem, a microcosm of the larger natural world. The historian's voice softened, becoming almost a lullaby. The seeds rested in the cool, dark earth, their silent promise held in the patient embrace of the waffle gardens. The Zuni waffle gardeners were, in essence, rain catchers, architects of moisture in a land where every drop was a treasure. Their designs were not merely functional, they were an expression of a profound connection to the rhythm of the heavens. The sleepless historian, their voice a low hum like the earth breathing, continued to trace the intricate details of this ancient practice. The waffle gardens were ingeniously designed to capture and hold the scarce rainfall, transforming fleeting showers into sustained nourishment for the crops. The raised beds, the waffles, were slightly bermed, creating shallow basins that collected water that flowed from the surrounding higher ground. The intersecting trenches acted as channels, directing this captured water towards the roots of the plants. The historian's voice was a gentle murmur, filled with a sense of wonder. "Imagine," the historian whispered, "the sound of a distant thunderclap, the anticipation that rippled through the community. Then the arrival of rain, not as a deluge, but as a series of brief, life-giving events." Each garden was a testament to careful observation and adaptation. The slope of the land, the texture of the soil, the typical intensity of rainfall, all these factors were considered in the precise angling and spacing of the trenches. The raised beds were not uniform, they were subtly contoured, designed to allow water to pool gently around the base of the plants, preventing runoff and maximizing absorption. The historian's gaze swept over the silent earthworks, envisioning the water's slow journey. The result was a system of passive irrigation that was remarkably efficient. The water, once captured, was held in the soil, slowly released as the plants needed it. This was a stark contrast to the wasteful practices of surface irrigation, where much of the water evaporated before it could reach the roots. The Zuni gardeners understood that in this arid land, water was not to be squandered, but to be cherished, to be guided with reverence. The historian's voice deepened, carrying the echo of ancient wisdom. The rain, in its fleeting generosity, found its purpose in these earthworks, a testament to human ingenuity in harmony with the natural world. The emergence of the first sprout from the seemingly barren earth was not a moment of frantic celebration, but a quiet acknowledgment of a promise fulfilled. The sleepless historian, their voice a gentle breath against the vast silence, continued to unfold the narrative of the Zuni waffle gardeners. In the carefully prepared soil of the waffle gardens, the seeds, having been entrusted to the earth's embrace, began their slow, inexorable journey towards the sun. This awakening was a testament to the profound patience that permeated Zuni life. The historian's voice was a soft murmur, carrying the weight of centuries. "Imagine," the historian whispered, "the cool darkness of the soil, the subtle stirring of life within." There was no sudden explosion, no hurried burst of growth. It was a gradual unfurling, a quiet victory against the odds. The waffle gardens, with their ability to retain moisture, provided a crucial buffer against the drying winds and relentless sun. The raised beds, gently cradling the young plants, protected them from excessive moisture and allowed for a more controlled release of water. This careful design ensured that the delicate sprouts had the best possible chance of survival, even in the most challenging conditions. The historian's gaze lingered on the faint impressions left by the recent rain, envisioning the moisture seeping into the earth. The gardeners, though they observed their nascent crops with a keen eye, did not hover or interfere excessively. Their role was one of guardianship, of providing the optimal conditions and then allowing nature to take its course. This was not a detached observation, it was an active participation in a slow, unfolding miracle. The historian's voice dropped to a near whisper, a sound like the rustling of dry leaves. Each tiny shoot that broke through the surface was a victory, a testament to the resilience of life and the wisdom of those who tended it. The sprout, in its nascent fragility, held the silent promise of future sustenance, a promise nurtured by the patient hands and the ingenious earthworks of the Zuni.
As the sun traced its leisurely arc across the sky, the tender sprouts in the waffle gardens began their deliberate ascent, their leaves unfurling with a quiet grace. The sleepless historian, their voice a low hum like the earth's gentle respiration, continued their hypnotic narration. This was a period of sustained attention, of a watchful presence that did not intrude but supported. The Zuni gardeners understood that the young plants, like all living things, required a period of unhurried development. The historian's voice was a soft echo in the vastness. "Imagine," the historian whispered, "the delicate green unfurling, the first tentative reach towards the sunlight. Each leaf was a testament to the successful journey from seed to nascent life. The waffle gardens, with their intricate network of channels and raised beds, played a vital role in this stage of growth. The retained moisture in the soil provided a consistent supply of hydration, preventing the plants from succumbing to the arid conditions. The raised beds also allowed for better aeration, ensuring that the roots received the oxygen they needed to thrive. The historian's gaze followed the subtle contours of the gardens, envisioning the slow, steady progress of the crops. The gardener's work during this phase was one of gentle maintenance. They might carefully remove any competing weeds that dared to encroach, their movements slow and deliberate, ensuring that they did not disturb the delicate roots of their chosen plants. They would observe the subtle signs of stress or health, their intuition honed by generations of experience. The historian's voice softened, becoming almost a whisper. This was not a time for hurried intervention, but for allowing the plants to establish themselves, to deepen their roots, to begin their quiet work of photosynthesis. The unfurling of leaves was a visible manifestation of the slow, sustained nourishment provided by the earthworks and the patient care of the gardeners. The desert air, particularly in the hours of early morning and late afternoon, held a unique quality, a subtle vibration that resonated with the quiet pulse of life in the Zuni waffle gardens. The sleepless historian, their voice a deep, resonant hum, continued to immerse the listener in the atmosphere of this ancient place. As the sun climbed higher, its intensity would gradually diminish the audible sounds of the environment, creating a palpable stillness. But beneath this quietude, a low, continuous hum persisted. It was the sound of the earth itself, a subtle resonance generated by the minerals within the soil, by the slow passage of underground water, by the very warmth of the sun. The historian's voice was a gentle guide through this sensory landscape. "Imagine," the historian whispered, "a sound so subtle you might not consciously perceive it, yet it permeates everything, a constant reminder of the living earth."
This hum was often accompanied by the faint whisper of the wind, a gentle caress that stirred the dry grasses and rustled the leaves of the hardy desert plants. It was a sound that spoke of endurance, of adaptation, of life finding a way even in the most challenging environments. The historian's gaze drifted across the vast expanse, the subtle contours of the waffle gardens appearing as deliberate strokes on a canvas of earth. Within the gardens, the plants themselves contributed to this sonic tapestry. The gentle rustling of their leaves, the almost imperceptible sigh of their stems bending in the breeze added a layer of organic sound to the ambient hum. It was a soundscape of quiet productivity, of life unfolding at its own deliberate pace. The historian's voice deepened, carrying the weight of timeless observation. This was not a silence of emptiness, but a fullness of subtle sounds, a symphony of the desert that spoke of deep connection and enduring life. The hum of the desert air was the soundtrack to the unhurried work of the Zuni gardeners, a constant, calming presence. The water, that most precious and elusive of desert gifts, followed a meticulously orchestrated journey through the Zuni waffle gardens, a testament to the ingenuity of their creators. The sleepless historian, their voice a slow, steady flow, continued to illuminate this vital aspect of the desert earthworks. When the rain did fall, even in its most modest form, the waffle gardens were designed to capture every precious drop. The gentle slopes of the raised beds directed the water into the intersecting trenches. These trenches, not deep but strategically placed, acted as miniature reservoirs, slowing the water's descent and allowing it to percolate into the soil. The historian's voice was like the gentle lapping of water against a shore. "Imagine," the historian whispered, "the first tentative drops of rain, their impact a soft patter on the dry earth. Then the slow, deliberate spread of moisture, guided by the earthworks. The soil itself, conditioned by generations of Zuni tending, was receptive to this water. It was a soil that had learned to absorb and retain, to hold on to this life-giving fluid for as long as possible." The historian's gaze followed the imagined path of the water, tracing the intricate network of channels. The raised beds ensured that the water was distributed evenly, reaching the root systems of the crops without becoming stagnant or running off. This was not a system of sudden inundation, but of sustained nourishment. The water, held within the soil's embrace, was released slowly, providing a consistent supply to the thirsty plants throughout the dry periods. The historian's voice deepened, carrying the resonance of ancient knowledge. The Zuni gardeners understood that in this arid land, water was not a force to be tamed, but a partner to be guided, its journey through the earthworks a slow, deliberate ballet of life. The water's slow journey was the heartbeat of the waffle gardens, a quiet testament to survival and abundance. Even in the meticulously crafted Zuni waffle gardens, the tenacious spirit of weeds found a way to emerge, and their removal was a task undertaken with the same unhurried deliberation as all other aspects of cultivation. The sleepless historian, their voice a soft rustle like dry leaves in the wind, continued their calming narrative. The Zuni approach to weeding was not one of aggressive eradication, but of gentle discernment. The gardeners understood that the earth was a shared space, and that some plants, though unwanted in the cultivated rows, were also part of the desert's intricate tapestry. The historian's voice was a patient explanation. "Imagine," the historian whispered, "the gardener's hands, stained with the rich hues of the desert soil, moving with a practiced slowness. Each weed was identified, its roots carefully considered before being gently dislodged." The waffle gardens, with their raised beds and defined channels, made this task somewhat simpler as the boundaries were clear. However, the deep-rooted nature of some desert plants required a careful touch, a coaxing rather than a forceful pull, to avoid disturbing the delicate root systems of the crops. The historian's gaze lingered on the subtle patterns of the earthworks, envisioning the gardener's careful ministrations. There was no sense of impatience or frustration in this work. It was seen as a necessary part of maintaining the balance, of ensuring that the cultivated plants received the full benefit of the soil's resources and the captured water. The historian's voice dropped to a near whisper, carrying the weight of quiet observance. The removal of a weed was not a victory over an enemy, but a subtle adjustment, a refocusing of energy back towards the intended bounty. The slow work of weeding was an embodiment of the Zuni ethos, a quiet dedication to harmony and sustained growth within the desert earthworks.
As the midday sun reached its zenith, the Zuni waffle gardens entered a period of profound stillness, a sun-drenched silence broken only by the faintest whispers of the natural world. The sleepless historian, their voice a deep, resonant hush, continued to paint a picture of this tranquil existence. The heat of the sun, though intense, did not stifle life, it transformed it. The earth, warmed to its core, held a comforting heat that radiated upwards, a gentle embrace for the roots of the plants. The shadows, though shortened, offered moments of respite, creating subtle variations in the light and temperature across the garden plots. The historian's voice was a slow, deliberate rhythm. "Imagine," the historian whispered, "the air shimmering with heat, a visual manifestation of the sun's power. Yet within this apparent stillness, life persisted, adapting and enduring. The silence was not an absence of sound, but a saturation of it. It was the silence of the earth breathing, of the faint buzz of insects going about their tireless work, of the almost imperceptible movement of air through the drying grasses. The historian's gaze swept across the landscape, the heat causing the distant horizon to soften and blur. The gardeners, during these midday hours, would often seek the shade of a nearby overhang or a sparse cottonwood tree, their activity shifting to observation or quiet contemplation. Their presence, even when still, was a part of the garden's ecosystem, a gentle guardianship that did not disrupt the natural flow. The historian's voice softened, becoming almost a lullaby. The sun-drenched silence was a sacred time, a period of profound connection with the earth, where the work of growth continued, unseen, unheard, but deeply felt.
As the day began its slow descent, a new sensory experience began to emerge from the Zuni waffle gardens, the subtle, evocative scent of drying earth. The sleepless historian, their voice a gentle exhalation, continued to weave their atmospheric narrative. This was the scent of resilience, of water slowly giving way to the embrace of the sun. It was a dry, mineral aroma, mingled with the faint fragrance of desert herbs that grew in and around the gardens. The historian's voice was a delicate evocation. "Imagine," the historian whispered, the dry dust rising in faint puffs as the air stirred, carrying with it the essence of this ancient land. It was a scent that spoke of patience, of the slow transformation that was the very essence of desert life. The waffle gardens, having absorbed the precious moisture, now released it back into the atmosphere in a slow, measured exhalation. This process not only nurtured the plants, but also contributed to the unique olfactory landscape of the desert. The historian's gaze lingered on the softening light, the long shadows beginning to stretch across the earthworks. The scent was also imbued with the subtle aromas of the plants themselves, the faint, earthy perfume of corn stalks, the delicate fragrance of herbs that had been allowed to grow in the margins. It was a complex tapestry of scents, each contributing to the overall sense of place. The historian's voice dropped to a near whisper, a sound like the gentle sigh of the wind. The scent of drying earth was a constant reminder of the delicate balance of the desert ecosystem, of the constant interplay between water and sun, and of the enduring power of life in this seemingly austere environment.
As the sun continued its inexorable journey towards the western horizon, the shadows began to lengthen, to stretch across the Zuni waffle gardens like a gentle, deepening embrace. The sleepless historian, their voice a low, resonant hum, continued to guide the listener into the heart of this ancient landscape. The quality of light shifted, becoming softer, warmer, casting the earthworks in a new, more intimate glow. The raised beds and channels, so distinct in the harsh midday sun, now seemed to melt into one another, their contours softened by the encroaching darkness. The historian's voice was a slow, deliberate cadence. "Imagine," the historian whispered, "the long, elegant lines of shadow reaching out, transforming the familiar contours of the land into something more mysterious, more ancient." The shadows not only altered the visual landscape, but also brought a subtle cooling to the earth, a welcome respite from the day's heat. This gradual change in temperature signaled a shift in the rhythm of the day, a transition towards the quietude of evening. The historian's gaze followed the slow, majestic sweep of the shadows across the desert floor. Within the gardens, the plants themselves seemed to respond to this lengthening embrace, their leaves turning to catch the last rays of sunlight, their forms becoming more defined against the darkening earth. The historian's voice softened, becoming almost a lullaby. The lengthening shadows were a gentle punctuation mark in the day's slow narrative, a signal of rest and a quiet preparation for the nocturnal life of the desert.
The twilight, that fleeting period of transition between day and night, cast a softening veil over the Zuni waffle gardens, bathing them in a palette of muted, ethereal hues. The sleepless historian, their voice a gentle whisper like the last breath of day, continued their atmospheric journey. The intense colors of the afternoon began to bleed into one another, the vibrant reds and oranges of sunset softening into mauves, indigos, and dusky purples. The stark outlines of the desert landscape became less defined, the distances blurring into a gentle haze. The historian's voice was a slow, almost reverent observation. "Imagine," the historian whispered, "the sky transforming into a vast canvas of deepening color, each hue bleeding into the next with an almost imperceptible grace." Within the waffle gardens, the earthworks themselves seemed to absorb this softening light, their textures becoming more subtle, their forms more organic. The raised beds and channels, so clearly delineated in the daylight, now appeared as gentle undulations, as if sculpted by the very essence of twilight. The historian's gaze swept across the serene landscape, the last vestiges of sunlight clinging to the distant peaks. The air grew cooler, carrying with it a sense of stillness and peace. The sounds of the day gradually faded, replaced by the faint chirping of crickets and the soft rustling of unseen creatures. The historian's voice dropped to a near whisper, a sound like the gentle sigh of the earth settling into slumber. The twilight's softening hues were a moment of profound tranquility, a visual and sensory lullaby that ushered the Zuni waffle gardens into the quiet embrace of the coming night. As the last vestiges of twilight faded, the Zuni waffle gardens surrendered to the ancient rhythm of the night, a time of quiet sustenance and profound connection to the cosmos. The sleepless historian, their voice now a deep, resonant murmur like the pulse of the earth, concluded their narrative. The stars, emerging one by one in the vast, inky canvas of the sky, became the dominant light source, their distant glow casting an almost mystical luminescence upon the desert floor. The waffle gardens, now largely hidden in shadow, continued their silent work, the absorbed moisture slowly nourishing the roots of the plants. The historian's voice was a slow, hypnotic cadence. "Imagine," the historian whispered, "the vast expanse of the night sky, studded with countless stars,
each a silent witness to the enduring cycle of life. The desert creatures, now awake and active, moved through the darkness, their movements a subtle symphony of rustles, scuttles, and faint calls. The air, cool and crisp, carried the distinct scent of the desert night, the subtle fragrance of nocturnal blooms, the faint, earthy aroma of awakened soil. The historian's gaze was directed upwards, lost in the silent grandeur of the celestial display. The Zuni gardeners, though their work was complete for the day, were intrinsically linked to this nocturnal rhythm. Their lives, like the plants in their gardens, were governed by the ebb and flow of the natural world, by the cycles of the sun, moon, and stars. The historian's voice softened, becoming almost a breath against the vast stillness, a final lullaby. The night's ancient rhythm was a time of rest, of regeneration, and of a profound, enduring connection to the earth and the cosmos, a connection embodied in the patient legacy of the Zuni waffle gardeners and their enduring dialogue with the desert.